my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys, welcome back to our /entitled where people seem to think that the world revolves around them and nobody matters. And guys, this episode will have you shaking your heads. We've got a Karen calling 911 because she thinks OP's running some sort of illegal operation in her home, and another Karen wants someone fired for eating a potato. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories. Don't shake your heads too hard, and as always, you can send or link your posts to this email right here. Let's dive in. So this isn't as crazy as some of the other stories I've read on here, but here's my recent experience with an entitled person. Some background information before we get started. My stepsister and her friends rent a house that my boyfriend and I purchased, renovated, and remodeled in a college town in central Missouri. They're on the lease with some fellow students at the local college. So in a 3-bedroom house, there are 5 girls. My boyfriend's over often because he takes care of the gardening, lawn care, and the tasks that require some heavy lifting. He had warned me that the next door neighbor is a bit nosy and seems to be the old gossipy type. Just for those keeping track, that's 5 girls, and 1 guy that routinely comes over. I haven't been to the house since we finished it until last weekend. Someone suggested that some small garden boxes along the side of the house would be nice, so they can plant some herbs and maybe some vegetables come springtime. I'm all about that, since I'm the green thumb of the couple. So I went over and I built some terraced garden boxes along the side of the house, each about 4 foot by 3 foot, so each bed was about 3.5 foot wide by 3/4 of a foot. I'm just finishing up when the old Karen makes her appearance. The conversation starts off rather normal, even though I can tell that she's digging for some gossip to tell the women group at church. The Karen then beckons me closer and she says, "I know you're just the hired help and you're here to do a job, but do you know what this house is?" I ask her, "No, what is this house?" Karen then says to me, "Well, I don't want to get involved, but I figured I'd ought to warn a pretty young thing like yourself that this house is a brothel." Karen says that with her voice lowered conspiratorially. I ask her what proof she has of this, and then she explains that she saw a man here about a week ago. We collect rent on the 5th, and that he was telling the girls that they had to pay him. She then goes on to explain that when he went to leave, that my sister and her friend both gave him a hug. I ask her if she has anything else, and she says that she sees a mixture of people coming in and out, mostly men coming, and they stay for a couple of hours or so before leaving, which really isn't that unusual for 5 college students to have their friends and classmates come over for study groups and group projects. My mistake is I end up rolling my eyes and clearly appearing uninterested in listening to her, because she starts to huff and says, "I see you aren't concerned about those girls and their welfare. I bet that you are in on it too. Well, I know the owner of this property, and I'm gonna call them and report what's going on to them." And this is where I knew I had her, because my boyfriend and I own this place, and I don't know her. I say to her, "Go ahead, Karen, why don't you call them over?" And she says, "Oh, well, they live in St. Louis, and you know what that means." I respond, "No, I really don't know what that means. I'm just trying to figure out if she innocently just means that it would take the owner too long to get here, or that the owner doesn't care." And for all who don't know, St. Louis and or Kansas City have also become a bit of a dog whistle for black in this part of the state. And that's exactly what I think she means by it. Almost confirmed by her stuttering, repeating, "You've got to know what that means, darling." The woman was clearly insinuating that the house was a brothel, because it was all women that lived there, and that African American criminals from the city are running it. Because the only reason that someone from St. Louis would own a house here full of women would be for criminal activity, and in her mind, all criminals are African American. In the mind of a racist, of course. So I say to Karen, "Listen, I own this house, and there's nothing like that going on. I need you to take your ass back inside and leave us alone. And if I hear about you harassing the people who live here, I'll have the police come," I said. Now, this did have the desired effect of making her go away, but what I failed to foresee in my anger was Karen calling the cops on me and claiming that I threatened her. My stepsister came out shortly after Karen went away and was talking to me about her and some of the rude comments that have been sent her way. From "bless your hearts" and "y'all need Jesus" to "you whores are going to hell for what you're doing." It was about this time that the police roll up and they start asking me questions about what's going on with Karen, as they had gotten a report that someone matching my description had threatened her and was running a brothel. So I relate to the officer, more or less, of what happened above. It's at this time that my stepsister asks the officer if she can show him something on her phone. The officer says yes, and my stepsister proceeds to show him a video and audio of the conversation. He then gives a, "Y'all can go back inside, I'll be right back." We all immediately gather around the side window that allows us to overlook her front door. He marches up to her door, and he gives it 3 thudding clubs against it before waiting for Karen to come out. Unfortunately, he didn't have the conversation on the porch with her. He comes back about 5 minutes later, and he tells us that he'd warned her to leave us alone and to stop harassing us, and that the house wasn't what she thinks it is. Before leaving, he gives my stepsister his card and says if she acts up again to give him a call, but that he's sure she'll behave herself. It's been 4 days, and Karen won't as much look in the direction of anyone in the house. Hopefully, this is the end of it. Update number 1. So I had another encounter with Karen. This happened on Thursday. For the people involved, I've talked about my stepsister in my last post, and I briefly mentioned my boyfriend. I would also like to introduce my business partner Seamus and his wife Piper. As is normal for this time of year, many people are getting together for Thanksgiving. Stepsister and friend were the only ones in their house, and they stated that they wanted to host Thanksgiving. It was a small event with just us 3 couples. Everything's going great, until after the sun goes down and we move from the dinner table to the fire pit in the backyard. The 6 of us are sitting around the fire just talking. Of course, with all of us getting into conversation, the volume of the conversation was getting a little loud. Granted, not illegally loud, but loud all the same. Well, the loudness summoned forth the Karen from her home, with all the bitterness that no family wanting her presence creates. Now, I'll never know what possessed her or deprived her of her good sense to come running up from the street with a cane, screeching like a banshee at the 6 of us, but it nearly cost her everything. Good old Karen got greeted by the barrels of 5 handguns pointed at her, and the booming voice of my boyfriend telling her to freeze and to not move an effing muscle. Thankfully, the voice of someone that spent over a decade in the Marines and the likely sight of so many handguns did make her stop. She turned around and ran back into her home. We immediately called the sergeant that left his card with us, and we were also informed that Karen was making a call to report us for discharging weapons at her and taking some shots at her. We informed the sergeant that there were no shots fired, but multiple handguns were brandished as she came charging at us from the darkness with a stick of some kind. Once the police arrived, it was only 2 units, with a grand total of 4 officers. Karen comes running out of her house, ranting and raving how we were shooting at her, and a whole bunch of other lies. The police, of course, got our side of the story, and we also showed the officer a video from our doorbell that records when it senses motion. It was really all the officer needed to see before he walks over to the officer that was taking Karen's statement and informs her that Karen was being arrested for criminal trespassing and criminal menacing. He then tells her that she needs to add being thankful for not having been legally shot on Thanksgiving to her list of Thanksgiving things to be thankful for. It's been nearly a week since this happened, and I was contacted by the owner of Karen's house, asking for an affidavit of her harassment towards my tenants, as well as her actions on Thanksgiving, so the landlord can move forward with the eviction case. We've also upgraded the security system to include motion-activated cameras that cover the entire outside and have overlapping fields of view. We've also been notified that Karen's unable to make bail and she's currently being detained until at least her arraignment. Now you may ask why guns were pulled. Well, in the dark of night, a deranged man with a machete or an old lady with a cane all sound about the same in the night when in a battle charge. Thankfully, no one fired into the darkness. And why did they have their guns with them? Because Seamus, Piper, and my boyfriend and I carry everywhere. It's no different than making sure we have our wallets. Stepsister also keeps her self-defense weapon on her at all times. Welcome to Missouri. Oh my goodness, guys, could you imagine having a neighbor like that? Like having wild assumptions about strangers and then charging at them in the middle of the night? And like OP said, guys, Karen was lucky that she was only arrested because it could have gone way worse for her. And the landlord wanting to evict her is just icing on the cake. And if you think that was ridiculous, oh boy guys, strap yourselves in for this next one. It just keeps getting worse and worse. Okay, so it honestly feels ridiculous that I have to post this, but my coworker's been getting on to me about this for weeks now, so I'm doing it. My whole life, I've been eating potatoes by microwaving them and then biting into them, eating them hot dog style. This is the easiest, most convenient, and intuitive way for me to eat potatoes, sweet potatoes or regular. I think this is how people in Japan eat them, or at least this is how I was taught by my Japanese parents to eat them. Whenever I go to a grocery store, I always pick out the most easily biteable potatoes, which are generally longer and thinner than most potatoes. I also work in an office of about 30 people. We all typically bring our own lunch, and usually I just eat it at my desk while doing work. No one's ever commented about how I eat potatoes, but I do eat them quite frequently. With that said, recently a new person was hired, and she clearly has a problem with the way I eat potatoes. A couple of times she's pulled me aside and she's asked me, why don't I eat potatoes a more normal way? I asked her what she meant, and she said that I was eating potatoes too suggestively, and that it was very inappropriate at work what I was doing. At that, I was a little shocked because I literally have my eyes glued to my screen whenever I'm eating, and I barely pay attention to how I eat. I told her that no one else seemed to have a problem with the way I eat potatoes, but she insisted that others were just too polite to say anything and that I'm disgusting. I asked a few other coworkers who were all just as confused as me about what she was saying. I figured no one else really had a problem with it. But this has happened multiple times. She kept coming to me and asking me to tone down the way I eat, even accusing me of going out of my way to choose sexy potatoes to eat. Now, I've considered bringing them other ways, but this is just the easiest way for me to eat them, and they're honestly delicious like this to me. I've asked her to maybe just not watch me eat, but apparently that's not feasible. Unfortunately, she's now reported me for eating potatoes, and now I have a meeting with HR next week. This seems really dumb to me, but am I the a-hole for eating sexy potatoes? Update number 1. So, I had a couple of meetings with HR. The first one was on my own, alone with the HR woman. According to her, a coworker had reported me for harassment, the sexual kind, and creating a hostile work environment. Now, I'm not gonna lie, after hearing those accusations, I was pretty scared and mad because it's really a serious charge. To Karen, I was allegedly making lewd gestures while eating, despite repeatedly being asked to stop. I told her exactly what happened, that I was eating potatoes the same way I'd always eaten them in the 4 years I've worked in this office. No one has ever had a problem with this until now. I told HR that the new coworker Karen approached me, telling me that I was eating potatoes inappropriately, and told me to eat them another way. I had explained to her that this is how I grew up eating them and I would not stop. That if it bothered her, that she could and should look away. I then continued eating potatoes this way, and then over the next several weeks, she kept complaining about my potatoes every single time I ate them this way, telling me to stop or I might get fired. As I was explaining my side, I could tell that HR was getting really annoyed. I don't think she believed that this was all there was to it, and she pressed me for more information. HR says to me, "Are you sure you didn't do anything to make her believe that you were being inappropriate? And are you sure you weren't harassing her, even unintentionally?" I told HR that I never even talked to Karen unless it was about work, or if she approached me first. HR then thanked me for coming in and told me that she'd get back to me. I think she met with Karen after that. Then, later in the day, we had a meeting with all 3 of us. Karen says that I'm a liar, that I was doing this on purpose and I was targeting her to make her uncomfortable. That after the first time she came to me asking me to eat my potatoes differently, that I dismissed it as a joke. Which, to be fair, I did because it's stupid, right? I did acknowledge that because who wouldn't take it as a joke? And then she claimed that each time she asked me to tone it down, I escalated by choosing increasingly more sexy potatoes to eat in front of her. By which point, I'm pretty sure HR was trying hard not to roll her eyes. I then responded by telling Karen that I literally gave zero thought about her when I bought my potatoes. I just selected them based on ease of cooking/eating. She then accused me of making eye contact with her while I was eating, which I think I did every single time she watched me eat because it's really uncomfortable having someone watch me bite, chew, and then swallow my food. I explained and I told her that I repeatedly asked her to stop watching me eat. She then pointed out that I'm on purpose doing this to target her, because no one else eats potatoes this way, and the only reason I would do so is to try to be provocative. which I swear to the Lord Almighty that HR almost laughed at her. I just showed her a video of Japanese people eating potatoes with hands and biting into them. The HR woman knows me and knows that I'm not the type to harass someone or deliberately make a hostile work environment. And at the end, she said something like, "I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. Perhaps it really would be best to look another way while your coworker's eating. I don't see anything wrong with this." Basically, HR was trying to politely tell Karen to get her head out of her butt. And then Karen tries to turn it around by claiming that I was making a hostile work environment by telling our other coworker bad things about her. But literally, all I had done was ask others if they were uncomfortable with the way I eat, and explained why I asked them. That's when Karen tries another angle and got even more ridiculous, claiming that the way I ate them with my hands was a COVID risk. And yes, she did bring that up, and that I was putting the safety of the office in jeopardy by eating them this way. HR then said if she was so concerned that she was welcome to work from home, as she can do her job remotely. Eventually, Karen had to concede that she had nothing left, so we were all dismissed. Later, I talked to my coworker who stopped bringing curry because Karen harassed him. I told him about the problems I had with her. He had been unable to eat his regular Indian lunches in the office because of her. We were both extremely annoyed, and honestly, I just felt extremely uncomfortable being in an office where she was constantly judging Asian people's food. So I decided to file a report with HR, as suggested by many people. I pointed out how she was harassing Asian people for their food choices, and many of her comments towards me were harassment. My coworker agreed to bring curry for lunch today, and in solidarity, I bought some too, along with my potatoes. Karen did not comment at all, but she did give us dirty looks, and she made disgusted faces a few times. I actually got called into a meeting this afternoon with my boss, who's also one of the founders of the company. He confessed that he didn't like Karen either, and that she's had multiple complaints about her within the first month of being hired. He then told us that he hired her as a favor to his wife because she's his wife's cousin and had lost her job. I wonder why they chose to let her go. He apologized to me on her behalf and assured me that he would talk to her, and that I could keep eating however I wanted, and there's no policy on what foods you can or can't eat in this office. I thanked him. I decided to keep my harassment claim with HR, and we have another meeting tomorrow. We'll see how this goes. Update number 2. So something I hadn't mentioned in the original post is that I'm gay, which is known in the office. However, I didn't mention this because it wasn't relevant until now. Karen lost it the other day when my Indian coworker brought a lovely tikka masala to share. He's done this before, and the kitchen is separate from the rest of the office, so you can't really smell anything microwaved unless you're in the kitchen. Karen said that it was really rude of him to keep bringing curries to the office, and that no one confronted him because they were all being polite, and that she'll speak up for those who are too scared to, even though most people enjoy the food he bought. He said in his home country that really well-spiced curries were extremely common. People bring them and microwave them in the office all the time, and it's among some of the most popular takeout food. He had no reason to believe it wouldn't be the same here. At that, Karen snapped and said they weren't in India. But my coworker said that he's from London. He was born and raised in London. Karen didn't really have a response to that. Karen confronted me in the parking lot after my HR complaint, claiming that I was trying to spite her with the hard-boiled eggs I had eaten at lunch, even though I'm definitely not the only one who eats them in the office. I guess eggs are now too sexy too. She then says to me that my harassment complaint was discriminating against her for being Christian, and that I was making her deliberately uncomfortable. According to her, my behavior was retaliatory to her having a Bible verse on her desk. And here's the kicker. She then said to me that apparently I was using my eating to get people to lust over me, implying that the Japanese try way too hard to be sexually appealing. Now, I would have gone off on her for saying that stuff, but I was too tired. I told her if my existence was bothering her, that's not my problem, that she should just work from home. I also subtly mentioned that maybe this is why she was laid off from her last job. Well, Karen files another harassment claim, saying that I was targeting her for religious discrimination. Like, damn Karen, I just want to eat my perfectly innocent food in peace. And somehow it turns into a whole religious and racial war. I told HR what happened, and then Karen claimed that I was trying to paint her in a bad light. My boss later talked to me privately and apologized. I think Karen is now remotely working from home, thank goodness, because I haven't seen her since last week. If she ever causes trouble again, I won't hesitate to report her, but for now, I think I'm content with eating sexy potatoes and eggs in peace. Holy guys, was that ever a wild post? And who would have thought that eating potatoes like that would escalate things to that extent? And seriously, some people really need hobbies or something because I have no idea what possessed that Karen to do that. Like OP said, just leave them alone and let them eat their potato in peace, Karen. In my opinion, boss needs to tell his wife, hey, I don't care if Karen's your cousin, she's gotta go. She's literally a lawsuit waiting to happen if she doesn't shut up. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our / entitled people. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/I don't work here lady episode, your favorite, where a Karen gets put in her place by an old granny. It's such a crazy story, so go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.